Welcome everyone. It's 12 o'clock. It's time for media availability. First, before we get into formal comments, I think it's important to remember a member of law enforcement in Kittitas County that made the ultimate sacrifice for public safety today, especially relevant on a day where we memorialized our members that fine officer gave his life and left a family behind. So that's very, very important to remember them today. Today, I think we have real news, revenue forecast, the budget options it creates. Normally I bring two people with me, but today, because Revenue Forecast Council, that the other chambers soon to announce a budget, to my left, I have Senator Braun, our ranking on Ways and Means, Senator Becker, our caucus chair, and Representative Wilcox, your comments.
Well, thank you, Mark. I agree. The big news coming up is what's going to happen with the budget in light of an another immense increase in revenue from the revenue forecast. So that's why I brought our budget lead, Representative Stokesbury, who I think is going to be doing most of the talk for the House. But because I've been here a little bit longer, I just want to point out, if you look at page 16 of the summary, you will see what worries me the most, and that is the immense buildup that we have of revenues right now encourages a situation that we've talked about in the past, exactly like the disaster that struck our state and our budgeting process in 2008. And to me, if you want to look a little farther out than the next week, the potential for extravagant budgets that set us up for immense damage, especially for those that need our help the most, is the worry that is most pressing.
I think my only summary on the budget for open things up is that today's revenue forecast allows us choices. We have a choice to talk about where we could spend money in a no-tax budget on priorities, debate those priorities with the extra resources. And the other is, nobody has really remembered the hardworking taxpayer this year. Maybe we should consider a sales tax cut for a system that our friends across the aisle say is regressive. Maybe a decent property tax cut for seniors or others. And maybe we should think about car tabs. Car tabs also hit low-income people disproportionately. So I think we're in a position to have a wonderful debate about those issues. So I'll move on from there. Comments? John?
I didn't know we were just speaking. I thought we were waiting.
Okay, well, if you want
I've been to one of these for a while. Anyhow, happy to be here, kind of joining on late notice, but I think the revenue forecast is just additional good news on top of what I would characterize as really the best budget situation we've seen in the 21st century. Just walking in the door at session, we came in with a balanced budget that had $500 million in reserves after 4 years. We've not been in that situation. I don't think, certainly not in the time I've been Olympia, and not for probably over a decade. So that's very good news. On top of that, the good news just keeps coming in. We've had a reduction in caseloads. We've had additional revenue that rolled itself out in the form of a forecast that increased expected revenue over this biennium and the next two bienniums by $1.4 billion, even after you take Wayfair, what we already knew would happen from Wayfair out of that, and take out the extraordinary revenue. That's additional $950 million that we didn't have before today, or didn't plan on having before today. So I would say all in, if you look at the things that have happened since the beginning of session, mostly without our action, but a few things with our action, we got somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 billion dollars to spend after a very robust maintenance level budget. I think that this is unprecedented in terms of the good fortune we've had, and I think we got to be very careful that we think about it carefully, that we spend it responsibly, that we recognize what has been said earlier, that we haven't had a recession for some time. We can all be certain, as the state economist said this morning, we don't know when or how big, but we can be certain there will be a recession in our future, and we should plan accordingly and not make expenditures this year that are not sustainable. We should live responsibly on what is a very robust maintenance level budget that has, by the way, grown 45% in the last 6 years, double the rate of personal income. So no reason to go out and spend a bunch, or to more importantly to tax our state taxpayers more when we have a great situation in front of us.
And I'd just like to say I was really excited when we heard about the budget this morning, and I really say it's time to say thank you to the taxpayers of the state of Washington. The taxpayers of the state of Washington have done their darndest to support all of the programs and the things for people that are in need. But now some of those taxpayers are in need, and it's time to say, let's reduce your property taxes, especially if you're a senior and you're trying to stay in your home. This budget, this revenue will enable us to say thank you to the seniors that have paid all these years by reducing their property taxes in a meaningful way. But then looking at the other things that this revenue can do for the individual taxpayer, I think again we should reduce the sales tax. The people that responded to my survey this year, it was all about taxes, how they're not able to afford the things that others are able to afford, even though they're working and earning a middle income type of job. Anything that we can do to say thank you and reduce that tax is something that we now have an opportunity to do.
And just building on what Senator Braun said, with that, potentially 2.5 to 3.5, potentially higher, depending on what kind of savings we want to think about. We have more than enough revenue within existing resources to fund what were our priorities on day one. Fixing the governor's broken mental health system, doing everything we can do this year to save the Orca, improving the way we drive out special education dollars. We can do all of those things. We can give state employees raises. We can do all those things easily within existing resources. There's absolutely no reason to be here longer than 105 days. There's no reason to have to entertain tax increase discussion. This is what I thought yesterday at this time, and after today's announcement, it just made our jobs $850 million easier.
So can you do all those things, including giving state employees raises and cover the cost of SEB with existing revenues, or would you have to cut back on those raises and change the SEB contracts?
Yeah, first answer is yes, you can do all the things. I mean, and simple math, right?
That is apparently
yes.
sensible that you guys
The CBAs are $1.5 billion over 5 years. The SEB is roughly 1.5 over 5 years. We just said we have 2.5 to 3.5. I think, as Representative Secretary said, it's actually going to be higher than that with any kind of traditional nonpartisan budget savings you see in a $50 billion budget. Yeah, we can actually absolutely do that. Now, I think that said, those are policy decisions. Understand, first with the CBA, largest CBA in our state's history, we ought to take care of our public sector employees. But if you do the 3% raise each year for both years of the biennium and project that out, that's $750 million. As I said, the CBAs, they cost $1.5 billion as they're agreed to. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there beyond very, very good raises for all state employees and all represented and not represented that I think is a legitimate policy decision. Now, I think that politically the other side will not even question that. They won't look at it as a policy decision. But I think when you're spending that kind of money, it's absolutely a policy decision. SEB, that can be, depending on how you do that, it can be 1.5 to 1.2, within the contract as negotiated. But there are other options that frankly may make more sense from a policy perspective. Understand that in the maintenance level budget, in this very solid maintenance level budget we have, there's $700 million that go towards higher rates for teacher healthcare. That pays them out at the PEB rate. That's a huge win right in maintenance level before you even get to the additional money for SEB. So I think we can do the right thing for teachers, we can do the right thing for state employees, and we can still have money left over to either make smart investments in other good things for the rest of the state citizens, or offer tax reductions in certain areas.
Yeah, Jim, just again, build on that. I think in 38 out of 39 counties, state employees are making higher than the median wage in that county. And we can still afford to give them a 3% each year increase, which is higher than average wage growth anyway. And we could also do some version of SEB or health benefits, and those two things are still only taking up, maybe a third of these available resources that Senator Brown and I are talking about.
But if you don't do that, if you don't do all of the contracts, you'll have to renegotiate them, right? So you won't be out of here by April 28th.
That is not typical, that's not how go ahead.
Yeah.
If you reject them, you have to renegotiate.
No, so the contracts have what's called a tail. So if we reject them, the existing contract will apply for the next year, and then they've got a year to go back and revisit it. But we can also reject it and then fund our own thing. We can reject it and fund 3% each year, which is pretty generous. And I would imagine a lot of reporters in this room would appreciate a 3% a year raise every year.
Jim, actually, in 2011, we did something very similar. We said we couldn't afford the entire CBA for opposite reasons. And we gave the governor X number of dollars and said, go renegotiate, redistribute this, and it worked.
But that was also on the table, I think, in the 2015, 2017, when the Republicans had the Senate by a margin too, and it didn't seem to move forward even under the divided government. Why would it be more likely to happen this year?
Well, do you really want to put it into tax increases, or do you want to make smart investments and consider tax relief?
And
We
just
have
to be
McCleary behind us.
Yeah, and just to be clear, what I just said is we can fund the whole CBA. I would advocate that this ought to be a policy discussion. Unlike previous years, we're not coming out of a recession right now. We haven't just had a reduction in wages for state employees. They've had record-breaking increases for 2 bienniums. They're now doing very well compared to their private sector colleagues, better in most cases in salary, even before you count the defined benefit pension and the very, very good health care. So they're doing really well. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take care of them. I'm just saying that ought to be a policy discussion. Now, do I expect it to be? No, we don't have the majority. They're going to rubber stamp it just like the law allows them to do. But we ought to be having that discussion.
And again, the mental health is one of the bigger issues. That's not a McCleary-sized problem. McCleary was several $1 billion a cycle for like 3 or 4 budget cycles. Right now, for behavioral health, you're talking several $100 million. So the size of the problems aren't the same. You can solve the behavioral health issue this year. You can solve the ORCA issue this year. To the extent we can in 2 years without more capital investments. And so the question really boils down to, should we be asking Washingtonians to pay higher taxes to fund state employee increases? And there's a way we can give state employees an increase without needing any new taxes. And if we didn't want to do that, then it would sort of be charging higher taxes to pay for employee compensation, which doesn't seem like a good use of resources.
And even accepting the premise of your question doesn't require a tax increase.
As long as we're premise questions, one of you mentioned, several of you have spoken since sense of briefly, I don't remember who, one of you mentioned the contention that the tax system is upside down. That is and has been a main contention of Democrats so far as they discuss revenue packages they will inevitably roll out. Just broadly, what's the response to you guys from that, assuming we see something that they put forward as a step to reverse that?
Yeah, so this is something I've talked about a lot. When you hear these speeches about how the tax code is upside down and you look at their solutions, all of their solutions magically raise more money to spend more state dollars to grow the size and scope of government. If you were serious about saying that the tax code was upside down, you would be proposing revenue neutral solutions. That would be intellectually consistent. But that's not what's happening. We're seeing proposals that are disguised as tax fairness, but are really just a net tax increase to Washington taxpayers. And as today's forecast showed, we don't need more revenue. We don't have a revenue problem. So to the extent that there are underlying structural issues, we can easily solve those. We can do an across-the-board sales tax cut. We could exempt prepared food from sales tax the same way we already exempt groceries, because low-income folks eat just as much food as high-income folks. And in some ways, if you're low-income and working 2 jobs and trying to make ends meet, you're probably more likely to have to drive through McDonald's on your way home from work, than if you're fairly well-to-do and have time on your hands to cook. And so, if you want to get after this problem, we can do what Senator Sessions said, cut car tabs. We can do across-the-board sales tax cut. We can do some targeted exemptions that rebalance it. But we don't need to engage in discussions that are really just a guise for raising more revenue overall.
Are either of your caucuses going to present bills that have sales tax or tax cuts in them?
Well, actually, we've always proposed tax cuts. That's kind of in our DNA. Senator Becker had one that would have brought real tax relief to seniors. Instead, we saw a one county property tax relief bill out on the state. And all 39 counties have people that could use property tax relief. We have a one county fix. That doesn't work.
And on that point, that actually would have affected a lot of people at a higher income level than currently exists. So right now it's at a $40,000 income, and this would have increased it, to $65,000. Those people that are living out in or moving out of King County or are buying properties in my Pierce County area, and the property values are going up, and the people that currently live there, that have lived there and paid taxes all of their lives, are now getting that new valuation, and it's taxing them out of their home. It is the number one thing I hear. And when we look at it, since I've been here, they've always said in healthcare, our number one goal should be to keep people in their homes because they age better, they live longer, they do they have a better life in their own homes, and yet we tax them out. So how wrong and backwards is that? So that bill did get a hearing in Ways and Means. We made some adjustments to it, but it never made it to the floor, and it would have actually been beneficial for not only seniors, but veterans and disabled people, and we really needed to address that.
What about a sales tax cut? Will we see a proposal for that?
No reason why we shouldn't. I think it puts a great option on the table. Instead of debating which taxes we're going to raise, why not have a debate about cutting some for a change? And if it happens to be those that are hurting low-income people, like we talked about with property taxes, car tab, sales tax, let's have that debate for once instead of which ones to raise.
Last year, Kerry Condata and I sponsored a bill to roll back the increase in the state part of property taxes because it was plain from the revenue forecast then that was not required dollars. So we were a year ahead of this, and in light of the newest revenue forecast, I think we'd love to make that part of the debate.
You mentioned several of those as hypotheticals, car tabs, targeted sales tax decreases, property taxes. But are there any, can you say a little bit more concretely which of those line up as a priority, or whether we'll see anything, can you say definitely whether we'll see a proposal related to any one of those in particular?
I can tell you about one that's in Ways and Means now. I hope to have a hearing shortly. It's about creating a tax exemption for infill housing for multi-family and single-family housing in urban areas. Allows local governments to create a lot higher density zoning and encourages developers to build infill housing. I think that goes to two things. One, it's good for economic development, and two, it helps us address the clear housing shortage we have in our state. And that's not imaginary or fictional. It's been dropped for a month and a half, and it's sitting in Ways and Means. I'd be happy to talk about it.
Oh, I was asking more about the priorities. So there are obviously the car tax bill as well. I'm just, do we have one of these that's a priority for the caucuses?
I think they're all good options, and I'd love nothing better than to lay them out there and have some votes on them. It's like, what part of good do we get to choose from instead of bad?
And you have to remember Senator Oban has written bills to reduce the car tabs already, and the people in Pierce County that didn't support ST3, and he's tried multiple times to have a bill pass, and I know the people in my district and his district would really like to see that happen.
Senator Brown, you have a bill to bond for some of the mental health programs. Does that have bipartisan support, or is there going to be another avenue to pay for that?
Well, that came out, first of all, it's sponsored strongly with a strong bipartisan support. It came out of Ways and Means on a strong bipartisan vote. It has a lot of supporters in both chambers. I think the issue for that is kind of a wait to see how the capital budgets develop and how well we're able to build out our mental health facilities around the state. So That bill, as you know, is aimed at community mental health, and we changed it in ways to do both community mental health facilities, ENT, crisis center, transitional housing, but also to fund the training hospital with UW at the Northwest campus, which I think is integral to us building out and really fixing a long failed mental health system in our state. So I can't tell you exactly when it will hopefully vote out of the Senate, but I think that'll be integral to the development and ultimately the negotiation of the capital budget. Right now, I think that frankly we're in good shape capital budget wise in the current year, perhaps in the current biennium, but as we consider building out a training hospital, building out potentially a new forensic hospital, building out community facilities around the state, that's when I think you start to have a difficulty, and there's the need to consider that. And my premise has always been not that we couldn't do it over time, it's that if we're this takes a lot of time. If we're gonna solve our mental health crisis in 3, 4, or 5 years versus 10 or 15 years, we need to accelerate the building process. And that's really what that bill is about. Lots of bipartisan support. Obviously, it's not out of the Senate yet, but I think it's still in play.
Well, we've got some of the newer members of the press corps haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, so I think we should defer to the newer members of the press corps.
Well, on that note, how do you plan to develop and maintain the behavioral health task force?
I think when you're looking at mental health, you have to look at it in, mental health is kind of like cancer. It starts in stage 1, goes to stage 2, goes to stage 3, and then 4. And stage 1 might be anxiety. Stage 2 might mean you have to go to someone and get some help. Number 3 is that you might have to be hospitalized to actually get help. Number 4 is you're probably never going to be able to be out in the community. So we have, and this has been a bipartisan effort, a number of bills that have gone through increasing the number of providers that can be out there through additional training, additional scope issues, etc. I have a bill that has passed the Senate that hopefully makes it through to the governor's office that'll actually get mental health into the schools via telemedicine at no additional cost to the schools. It's an amazing thing. But throughout this whole process on mental health, it should be our top priority, if you want to know the truth, because that'll probably end up costing us more than the K-12 system if we're not careful and address it from the beginning. So thank you for that question, and stay tuned. I think there's going to be a lot happening on mental health.
Based on what made it out past cutoff, what are the key behavioral health and mental health bills, other bills that you see moving forward between now and the end of the month?
I know that Senator Brown, I have a list here. Yeah.
You can go through the bills if you'd like. I'd really suggest you a key behavioral health bill this session will be the budget. I mean, the fundamental thing that we have to do is fund the build out of community beds, and some of that's capital related, and I think that's going to be part of the capital budget, but also build out state or private beds at a fee rate that can start taking, move patients out of western states into private rate-based beds around the state, 9180D beds. That's going to be budget driven, and then to get take up on that, the budget is going to have to do the right thing. I think we'll see large, pretty good bipartisan support for that. It's kind of going to the earlier question. I don't know if that's exactly how I would. Senator Becker talked about kind of some of the bills out there. I view this as we have a huge transition to make in our state from a bunch of beds at Western State. We now have the decertification. We know there's no clear path to recertify. It's going to push us to build bed capacity out around the state. That's going to take rates in the budget. It's going to take capital budget expenditures or grants to help build out these facilities. It's got both at the private level, say the private hospital level, and the community centers, whether it's ENT, the transition, or crisis centers. So what's going to drive this really is, and there's a whole bunch of bills that go towards helping it, but ultimately it costs money, and I think you'll see bipartisan support for money. Now, money isn't the only answer, don't get me wrong, but you can't build out private beds. You're not gonna get the hospital show up and say, hey, we're gonna provide 60 beds or 100 beds or whatever they're able to around the state without the right rates.
So do you have a number then for the operating budget and the capital budget? Numbers for each.
Just to be clear, we're all in the minority. We don't write the budget, but I think, I'm not, sorry, me flipping, I apologize. I expect the investment to be in the operating budget in the 4-year, $400 to $450 million. That's what I would expect. And I think if you really look at how that, think about that, you're building capacity, additional capacity outside western states. And as you build that capacity, ideally you can take wards off the western states over time until you get to everything is moved largely out of western states into either private, into the community facilities, or possibly into the training hospital at University of Washington. Does that answer your question?
I'm
Well, do you have a 2-year number for
Divided by 2.
the operating budget?
I'd say it's $200 to $300 million.
We have to balance our budgets over 4 years, so I couldn't tell you any 2-year number. It doesn't matter. What matters is the 4-year number.
But just recognize,
Just trying to raise your paper.
put this into perspective. Some of this is money driven, but the money driven is not about, we do have some backlog and we need additional funding for that. But mostly what we need is additional funding to build out beds that are ultimately going to replace beds that currently exist. So that, once you get through that, you need some transition, but a lot of that is neutral cost, because you're taking a person in a bed at Western and you're putting them in a private 90, 120, 180 bed at facility, private facility. So, and they also bear in mind that over the last 4 years we've doubled the funding at Western State. So we're working from it kind of goes to the earlier discussion we had about a very robust maintenance level budget. This is some about funding, and I think that's what will drive the transition. But really, it's about managing that transition, I think.
And I think that's the key point. I think that the goal should be is to getting people the help they need before they get to that stage 3, needing hospitalization, and I think building out all of these facilities. I'm hopeful that in the future, with the earlier intervention, that we won't need that many facilities. So hopefully, a
I have
reduction.
one more question. As far as those facilities go, the governor's original proposal, not even this year, last year, called for all state-run facilities. His proposal has, evolved over time to now being a mix. I heard that at the start of the session that it was a subject of discussion who would run these. Are there guidelines, are there red lines in the sand for either in either chamber over who will run these? Do they all have to be private, or is a mix of public-private acceptable? There are counties where you can't find vendors or private charity organizations to run.
So to answer, are there red lines? I have not heard any red lines. What I have heard is broad support for private and nonprofit run operations, and there seems to be strong support from our hospitals around the state to provide these services, assuming we get the rate right. And there's already a network of mental health providers around the state, some of them local, many of them either statewide or national, that run these types of facilities. So I think the strong push, with the one exception of the training hospital at the University of Washington, the strong push is, I said two exceptions. The training hospital at the University of Washington, and whatever we do for replacing the forensic beds at Western State, I think ultimately will be state-run. But the rest of that, I think the strong push, and I can't speak for the other side, but all the discussion and the interest on both sides that I've heard is about having either private hospitals or nonprofit organizations run these beds. I don't think that's that controversial.
And I think it's also worth thinking about the fact that as we try to be more and more proactive, the execution on policy is going to take place, whether it's successful or not successful, at often the county or other local government levels, and there's quite a bit of innovation going on. You see Pierce County, for example, trying hard to get out and intervene with people when they're in crisis. Mobile vans, for example, that carry intervention teams. And I think Bruce Stammeier is working hard at doing exactly what Randy mentioned, is intervene before you have a crisis, or intervene early in the crisis. And that's going to happen with state dollars in a lot of cases, but the execution is going to be at the local level. And I happened, after the KOMO report came out, I called up one of your colleagues who's done a lot of work in this arena, and one of the things that that person said was that the most important first step is to figure out how can we get local governments working together and make it a lot less complicated to have a response to mental illness, and the other topic was homelessness, which of course is so closely related. So the state is a source of dollars, but the success will come from good local government and good local plans and execution by the people that are on the ground there.
And just one last thing, building on what Senator Braun said, there's always going to be some role for, I think, state facilities. I think maybe it's appropriate, like you said, for forensic patients. There's also on the civil side, there's always going to be folks that are very have very high acuity that are really difficult to treat, and private community hospitals might not want to take those clients, no matter how much money we give them, and the state would have to. So there might always be a role there, but we've seen how poorly the governor has managed the 2 existing state facilities, and I don't think there's a lot of appetite to allow the state to continue to play any larger role than is necessary.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us again.